Last week, it was announced that legendary comic book artist Steve Ditko had passed away at the age of 90. He was actually found in his apartment on June 29th and may have actually died 2 days before that. That may sound depressing, but as you'll soon see, that's probably the most Ditko way he could have gone out. By now, you've probably read a bunch of obituaries and tributes to the man. You've probably seen a couple of YouTube videos eulogizing him. So one more video from me might seem redundant, but with a man as important to comics as he was, no amount of tribute is enough. This is Steve Ditko. To understand why Steve Ditko was and still is an important figure in the world of comics, we have to go all the way back to 1962 and the creation of Spider-Man. Stan Lee had just come up with this new concept for a superhero. He'd be a teenager who was awkward and nerdy and had problems that his superpowers couldn't solve. Initially, Stan assigned Jack Kirby to create the look of Spider-Man, but something felt wrong with Jack Kirby's design. He had a traditional muscular body, a mask similar to that of the Flash or Batman, and just didn't really fit the offbeat tone Lee was trying to establish with this new character. And that is where Steve Ditko came in. Ditko gave Stan Lee's new creation the look and feel that the character needed. Spider-Man had this wild new look that was completely different from every other character on the market at the time. He had this striking red and blue costume with a unique webbing pattern all over it. He was svelte, spindly, and just the right kind of off-putting. Ditko's design of Spider-Man was so good, so successful, that it is still in use today with little to no variation. Remember how mad we were when they changed the costume for Amazing Spider-Man 1? That's what happens when you mess with Ditko's design. It just doesn't feel right. And think about that for a minute. When somebody comes along and designs a character better than Jack f***ing Kirby, you know they're next level good. And by the way, this is the only known rendering of Jack Kirby's design for Spider-Man, and it was drawn by Steve Ditko. But it wasn't just Spider-Man that Ditko nailed. He also created the perfect Peter Parker. Here was a character who looked like an actual teenager, who was really nerdy, who was scrawny and awkward, who always looked nervous and stressed out, even when he wasn't. It was a big deal when Steve Ditko left The Amazing Spider-Man after 38 issues. John Romita was brought on board to replace him, but John Romita didn't draw a weird teenage Peter Parker. He drew a handsome man Peter Parker. And Romita freely admits this. He admits that he couldn't replicate Ditko's style and had to go his own way. And while this was ultimately for the best, at the time, it left a lot of fans upset. Like, you think it sucks today when an artist gets replaced on a title? Back then, if anybody other than Steve Ditko was drawing Spider-Man, that wasn't Spider-Man, that was a completely different character. People would actually write into Marvel and complain that somebody else was drawing Spider-Man. I have issue 52 of The Amazing Spider-Man from 1967, a couple of years after Ditko left, and people were still writing in about the change. In fact, let me read an excerpt from one of those letters. I'm not gonna open it because there's an old comic that's gonna fall apart, but I typed it out. Here it is. What happened to the real Spider-Man? In the space of almost a year, the team of Stan Lee and John Romita has changed both the appearance and the personality of Peter Parker to the point where he is practically beyond recognition. PD has evolved from a quiet, sensitive, studious, square-type loner to a groovy, hip, and frugging partygoer who zips around on a motorcycle and has no trouble at all trying to get a date with some slick chick. What I'm trying to say is, please bring back the old Spider-Man. The Spider-Man who had often thought of giving up his identity as a crime fighter, the Spider-Man who was constantly being weighed down by a feeling of guilt over the death of his uncle and by every other present sense of loneliness. I actually know the guy who wrote that letter. Good dude. Steve Ditko's talents didn't begin and end with character design though. His innovations bled onto almost every corner of the pages he drew on. He popularized the 9-panel grid layout decades before Watchmen did, and would use the smaller panels, almost claustrophobic panels, in fun, creative ways to enhance the drama of a story. In The Amazing Spider-Man number 33, Ditko used the 9-panel grid to its fullest, really using it to showcase the struggle and despair Spider-Man had trying to lift the heavy machinery off of him. But with each passing page, the panels would get bigger and bigger as if Spider-Man was trying harder and harder to escape, until finally climaxing in a full-page spread of Spidey breaking free from his impending doom. And that's to say nothing of his work on Doctor Strange, a character he pretty much created on his own. The way he played with colors and shapes was very revelatory for the time, particularly with the way it moved the narrative forward. Even after he left Marvel and moved on to other companies like Charlton and DC Comics, Steve Ditko kept creating new and interesting characters like the Question, the Ted Kord Blue Beetle, Hawk and Dove, the Creeper, and Mr. A, perhaps the most Ditko of all the Ditko characters. Mr. A, perhaps more than any other character, truly captures everything Ditko was about. A weird-looking character with psychedelic background and an unflinching moral compass. Ditko was a big believer in Ayn Rand's objectivism philosophy, and Mr. A was the personification of this belief. And if you think modern comics are a bit too liberal, then boy, you're in for something special with this, because these are not that. Steve Ditko would continue to work professionally in comics until the 90s, even going back to Marvel, creating characters like Squirrel Girl and working on titles like Power Rangers and Indiana Jones even. Even in retirement though, Ditko would continue to work on comics, retreating to his office in New York City where he would just create his own work away from the world. He was always an intensely private man, often working on Spider-Man and Doctor Strange by himself in the Marvel bullpen away from everybody. He never gave interviews, he never went to conventions. There are only about 3 or 4 images of Steve Ditko known to exist, one of them being this famous self-portrait of him from Amazing Spider-Man Annual #1. To me, this drawing perfectly encapsulates his f**k-off attitude. He'd complain about never receiving proper credit for co-creating Spider-Man, while at the same time refusing any compensation or royalty checks from the character's appearances in movies and TV shows. He once said that the reason why he doesn't give interviews is because he wants people to focus on the story and not the man behind the story. He would later go on to create characters like Hawk, Mr. A, and the Question, who were basically speaking for him, spreading his, let's say, less than progressive worldview. That's why I'm ultimately not surprised with the way he died, alone and unfound for days. It's how he lived his life. He ultimately wanted to just be left alone to work. I mean, it was either that or he would outlive Stan Lee out of pure spite. It's rare that we get an artistic talent in comics who not only defines a character, but a whole generation. Steve Ditko wasn't just that artist, he was that artist while Jack Kirby was reigning supreme. And while his personality and politics weren't everybody's cup of tea, to me, it just added to his mystique and legacy. We were incredibly lucky to have somebody like Steve Ditko grace us with his art and his genius. For his innovations in panel structure, for his character design, for Spider-Man alone, he will be missed, whether he likes it or not. Let me know down below or anywhere on the internet what your favorite Steve Ditko work is. The man did so much besides Spider-Man and Doctor Strange. He created the Atom, like I said, Hawk and Dove, the Question, the Creeper. I believe he drew the second issue of the Incredible Hulk, again taking over from Jack Kirby. He created Squirrel Girl, like I said. He did so much for the medium in such a long period of time. It's incredible the amount of work he did. In the description below, I put some Amazon links to some of the best Steve Ditko work, his early Spider-Man stuff, his Doctor Strange stuff. If you want to check them out, check them out. You'll support this channel and you'll keep the memory of this genius alive. I didn't put any Mr. A stuff down there because that stuff's hard to find, and he wasn't a big believer of reprinting his old work. He wasn't a fan of trade paperbacks, believe it or not. Also, I can't recommend this enough. Make sure you check out the documentary In Search of Steve Ditko by Jonathan Ross, one of the best comic book documentaries ever. It's free on YouTube. I'll even link to it here. Of course, new videos every Tuesday and Wednesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern. It's Wulff Den Live. So subscribe to see all of that. Like this video and share it with a friend who may or may not be a fan of Steve Ditko. Show them this video, and I think they'll begin to understand why he was such an important figure in comics, period. Thank you all for watching. I will see you next time.